শুভ সন্ধ্যা। বিজয়ের মাসে সব মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের প্রতি আন্তরিক শ্রদ্ধা, ভালোবাসা, সব শহীদদের প্রতি আন্তরিক কৃতজ্ঞতা এবং সব বীরাঙ্গনাদের প্রতি শ্রদ্ধা জানিয়ে শুরু করছি আজকের অনুষ্ঠান। আজকে আমরা এমন একজন মানুষের সঙ্গে কথা বলবো বাংলাদেশের বিজয়ের সঙ্গে, যার সম্পর্ক ওতপ্রোতভাবে জড়িত। আমরা কথা বলবো জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিস ওবিই, যাকে 2012 সালে ফ্রেন্ডস অফ লিবারেশন ওয়ার এবং 2018 সালে বাংলাদেশের নাগরিকত্ব প্রদান করা হয়। জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিস ওবিই বর্তমানে একজন ডেভেলপমেন্ট এবং ডিসেবিলিটি কনসালটেন্ট এবং হিউম্যানিটেরিয়ান অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট হিসেবে কাজ করছেন। তার সঙ্গে আজকে কথা বলার এই সুযোগ আমরা বিজয়ের মাসে পেয়ে আন্তরিকভাবে গর্বিত এবং কৃতজ্ঞ তার কাছে যে জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিস ওবিই, যিনি বাংলাদেশে জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিস ভাই হিসেবে বাংলাদেশের মানুষের কাছে অতি আদরের, অতি আপন একজন মানুষ। Julian Francis, welcome to the show, and I would like to have the permission to call you Julian Bhai.
Of course, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a real pleasure, and we are really privileged to have you on the studio, especially in this month of victory. And we know that you have a very special connection with the people of Bangladesh, and especially what you have seen, what you have experienced during the repatriation of the refugees back in Bangladesh, and you have had the experience of talking and seeing Bangabandhu, getting his advice in terms of the rehabilitation program. So we'll know a little bit more about that. Before we get to that point, tell us very briefly, Julian Bhai, you became involved with charity work at a very early age of 26, and you have had that experience from your family. What was that about?
Well, before that, in fact, at a much younger age, the uncles of my mother were either businessmen or missionaries in different parts of the world, including the Indian subcontinent. And so my mother, who studied geography at university, and she gave a lot of importance to human geography, so she was the influence regarding helping people who are not as fortunate as others. And so she got me involved with charities like Oxfam at a very early age, at even 8 or 9 years old. But later on, when I had qualified in agriculture and animal husbandry, then I volunteered to go in a sort of famine rehabilitation program in Bihar in India, which was funded by Oxfam. And so I had already been in India for 3 years when the crisis started, not only in fact, before the refugee crisis, the cyclone of 1970 in what was then East Pakistan.
So, Julian Bhai, let me understand a little bit more. You are a British graduate. You could have done so many other things in this country, especially at that time. Instead, your mother's influence on you was definitely quite strong, and you decided to take a life or a profession that could have been full of challenges, because in Bihar you are working with the horizons, the untouchables. So,
that's right.
Which was quite a lot of big challenge to take at the age of 26.
Well, I came to Bihar at the age of 22.
Oh, so earlier than that.
No, and after 3 years in Bihar, then that was sort of the end of my contract, and as a volunteer, and so I didn't know quite what I was going to do. But then the problems of Bangladesh changed my life.
Okay, so let's hear that. I'm sure it's going to be very emotional story for our viewers, especially our new generation British Bangladeshis who possibly haven't got an idea to that extent in terms of how big was that rehabilitation program in terms of bringing the refugees who took refuge in Kolkata at that in 1971, coming back from Kolkata to Bangladesh, to the country that was at that point independent, but definitely they had no idea what they're going to see, what they're going to find. So before we do that, before we talk about that, Julian Bhai, what was the connection between you, Oxfam, and getting involved with the rehabilitation program of Bangladeshi refugees in 1971 and after we got the victory?
Well, to begin with, of course, it was the involvement of Oxfam to assist with the refugees in the refugee camps in India, not just near Calcutta, but in far-flung places like Tripura, Meghalaya, Assam, Cooch Behar and northern Bengal. And that was done because we had connections with some NGOs, but also particularly with the Gandhian ashrams, because we had worked closely with the Gandhians in Bihar. So we had a lot of very good connections, and that's how we got involved.
So what did you see, Julian Bhai, when you are visiting some of these refugee camps in northern India, I mean in Kolkata and surrounding areas? What did you actually see?
We saw in many places we saw children and women and old people, but not the fit and active men, because a lot of them had joined the Mukti Bahini, the freedom fighters in Bangladesh. So we saw a lot of there was a lot of malnutrition, particularly of the children, but we had the cholera epidemic, and that monsoon that year was very bad, so a lot of the refugee camps were flooded. So there were tremendous problems. However much the government of India and other organizations did, it was never enough, and a lot of people died.
I think when we see refugee camps in Syria, in Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, or anywhere else, the Ukrainian refugees, it reminds us that people of Bangladesh, East Pakistan at that time, they experienced similar kind of things, but obviously we don't often talk about the trauma the people experienced at that time. And you are saying that, what exactly was the living condition of those camps?
It varied, of course, but because some camps had organizations such as Oxfam, but also many other organizations which improved things and helped with sanitation and important aspects like that. But no, the one of the biggest problems was to get activities for the children to do, and to try to help with depression, because the understanding of mental health that we think about and know about now, that was not being considered at all at that time. And
being alive was possibly the most important thing at that time.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, yes. But it was very significant that one of the professors, medical professors, overseeing some of the work, asked me whether Oxfam could buy sets of tablas and harmonium and bring music into the camps. And we bought about 100 sets for different camps, and then that changed the mood, because the people were singing the songs and remembering the green fields of their villages and the festivals they used to have, whether it was Eid or Puja, and it changed the atmosphere in many of the refugee camps, which was quite a remarkable experience.
And you were talking earlier about the impact of music, especially Muktir Gan, amongst those people who were in the refugee camps. What was that? I mean, what was that
Well,
about?
that was a group of singers who were moving around and encouraging the freedom fighters. That was the main reason for their moving around from different units of the freedom fighters, but also came into the refugee camp. So that was quite remarkable.
One of the singers, Mahmudur Rahman Benu, who was the leader of one of these group, Muktir Gan, he lives in the UK.
I see.
And I'm sure you will have the opportunity to meet him, because obviously later on, when we have seen Muktir Gan, the film, we came to know that that's how Mukti Joddhas, that they were inspired, as well as the people who were at the camps.
Yeah, I knew one of the singers who was very young then, because he and I were the same age, Tariq Ali, who then became one of the trustees of the Liberation War Museum.
Absolutely.
He sadly
Benu Bhai, Mahmudur Rahman Benu, he was the main lead singer. I'm sure you have seen him. I mean, when you see him, you'll remember. He worked quite closely with Tariq Ali, because he was in the same movie, Muktir Gan. So you're saying that the music made a significant impact in terms of uplifting people's emotional health.
yes, dramatically, and saved a lot of money on medicine.
Absolutely, yeah. But surely medicine was definitely not possibly the solution, but uplifting their mood through various means was definitely a much better way. So that's when you're working with the refugees in the camp in India. How did you come to know, or how did you become involved with the rehabilitation program in terms of bringing the refugees back to Bangladesh? When was it that you traveled from India to Bangladesh? I know you traveled by car, by
one of our Land Rovers.
Yeah.
That was in the third week, 20th of January, and
so by then Bangabandhu has returned.
Yeah, he'd been there. He'd returned 10 days earlier, and we took 2 days to reach Dhaka, because the roads were jammed up with people, not only in a few vehicles but walking home, or even sometimes on bullock carts. And so we then stayed overnight in Jeshore in a mission hospital, where the father, the Catholic father, who was a doctor, he had been killed by the Pakistanis, and his crime was giving aid to the wounded freedom fighters. So we stayed there and then continued to Dhaka, but we reached Dhaka the second day after queuing for a long time for the ferry, and we reached about midnight, when there was nobody on the street, no vehicle, no person, and suddenly we were surrounded by military and police, and we didn't know there was a curfew.
But that's in January.
Yes.
So why there was curfew in January?
Because of just to keep things
the peace, yeah. Or
so then when they found out who we were, then they escorted us.
So was that Indian army?
That was more Bangladeshi personnel.
Okay.
And then they escorted us to the Purbani Hotel in the centre of Dhaka. But so that was quite an experience, the journey, and most of the people returning home there was a mixture of joy and excitement, but also a bit of fear. What will they find when they get home to their villages? Because we saw hundreds of burnt out villages on the way, and bridges and culverts blown up, ferries, launches sunk in the river. So there was tremendous damage.
So did you see dead bodies lying in the river?
Not at that time, no.
So by January, it started to be cleared up.
Well, certainly from the road. We didn't go into interior areas at all.
So what was the mood in liberated Bangladesh in January, even if you've entered late at night? So
no, I mean, there was, in January, particularly after the return of Bangabandhu, there was a lot of euphoria, excitement. It was only a couple of months later, when the people in the civil service had assessed what the problems were, that everybody realized that there was a very, very serious situation.
So what was your, we know that you met with Bangabandhu, and it was a very, surely an eye-opener conversation, communication with the father of the nation. What was that conversation about, and how did you then become involved with the rehab plan?
In fact, I had met Tajuddin Ahmed, the Prime Minister in exile during the Liberation War time, in Calcutta 2 or 3 times, and it was he, when I came to Dhaka, he arranged for my meeting, and I thought it would be just a quick courtesy call, because there were hundreds of people wanting to meet Bangabandhu. And then he had obviously been briefed a bit by Tajuddin, and I said I wanted his advice about what a small organisation like Oxfam could do with the huge needs for rehabilitation, and he took his pipe out of his mouth and pointed it at me and said, "How did you come here, young man?" And I said, "Well, I drove overland from Calcutta." And then he said, "What did you see? You have seen more of my country than I have, because I've been locked away for 9 months, and I haven't been out of Dhaka very much since coming." And then I said about the bridges and culverts and ferries and so on. And I said, but bridges and ferries are more like a bilateral or multilateral aid thing, not an Oxfam thing. And he said, no, ferries are the lifeblood of my country, and if you think Oxfam cannot buy new ferries, please see if you can help repair ones that can be repaired. And then he asked that an appointment be made so that we saw the Bangladesh Inland Waterways Authority. And then, as a result of that conversation, Oxfam managed to not only repair quite a large number, but also purchase 3 ferries, which were unusually named after 3 flowers: Kasturi, Korobi and Kamini.
And where did those names came from?
Well, one of my colleagues who had worked in Bangladesh before, he said, thinking about how the music in the camps had excited the people, he said, instead of naming them after freedom fighters, why don't we name out of the flowers, the flora and fauna of the country? And so that's how they...
So I think at that time, 1971, that was a big contribution for Bangladesh in terms of, because as Bangabandhu said, the rivers are the lifeline of Bangladesh. So if we could have improved the communication through the rivers, that possibly...
Yeah, and they were truck carrying, they were roll-on, roll-off ferries, and until a few years ago, even maybe till the new Padda Bridge has been built, they were still
Running.
moving at that crossing.
We'll come back after the short break. দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছি জুলিয়ান ভাইয়ের সঙ্গে। বাংলাদেশের 1971 সালের বিভিন্ন অভিজ্ঞতা তিনি আমাদের সঙ্গে ভাগ করে নিচ্ছেন। ছোট্ট বিজ্ঞাপন বিরতির পর ফিরে আসছি, আমাদের সঙ্গেই থাকুন।